Warning: the content ahead may be frightening or distressing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. If you like this content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. For weeks, neighbors complained about the house on Westcott Street. Its smell, its noises, the way it seemed to lean a bit closer to the sidewalk each day. The structure had always been old, but lately it had begun to look swollen. When police finally forced their way inside, they expected to find a body. Instead, they found silence. A silence so thick that it seemed to cling to their clothes. A silence that seemed aware of them. The occupant, Dale Mercer, had vanished. Yet something in the walls continued whispering his name. Weeks earlier, Dale had hired contractors to repair the hallway plaster. The wall had begun to bulge, forming a soft dome beneath the wallpaper. Everyone assumed it was moisture or termites. When the workers removed a section, they found another wall directly behind it, smooth, seamless, and built with materials older than the house itself. Almost like someone had hidden a smaller chamber inside the house. When the workers tapped on it, the sound came back hollow, followed by a faint trailing whisper. Too quiet to understand, too deliberate to dismiss. The contractors left early that day and never returned. That night, Dale heard the whisper again, coming from the same patch of wall, but softer, like syllables scraped through wood. Dale tried to ignore it, but the whispering persisted, learning the shape of language with clumsy eagerness. Not sentences, just noises at first. Clicks, sighs, wet, breathy exhalations. Then, after days of repetition, the sounds sharpened into crude approximations of speech. They said his name. Dale, Dale. The whispering always came from inside the wall. Always too low, always too close. He bought new locks for his bedroom door. He began avoiding the hallway entirely. But the house was old, and sound traveled. Some nights he woke thinking someone stood in his room, only to find the whispering muffled behind the drywall. Never loud, never urgent, but constant, as if practicing. The hallway began to narrow, not all at once, not in a way a visitor would notice. But little by little, day by day, the space between the walls tightened. Frames that once hung straight now tilted inward. A bookshelf stood half an inch further from the wall each morning. The house emitted small pops and creaks in the dark, the same way wood does when it shifts, except this wasn't natural settling. It felt timed, rhythmic, like breathing. Dale pressed his palm to the bulging spot in the plaster and felt warmth beneath it. Slow waves of heat pulsing at intervals far too long to be human. Something behind the wall was sleeping, and waking, and sleeping again. 2 weeks after the renovation, the wallpaper split open. A thin vertical tear revealed compacted insulation, rotten wood, and behind it, something white, round, wet, reflective. An eye. Human in shape, but far too large, watching through the crack with an unblinking, glassy stare. Its pupil contracted when Dale entered the room. The whispering began again, eager, as if excited to finally be seen. It formed clearer syllables. Dale, home. He shut the door. He pushed furniture against it. But all night long, he heard the wet blinking coming from inside the wall. And something else, breathing, not his, The voice no longer needed to whisper. It spoke with confidence. Sentence fragments first, then crude mimicry. Sometimes it repeated conversations overheard during the day. Sometimes it rehearsed his own voice, getting closer each night. The house began swallowing sound in strange ways. Footsteps no longer echoed properly. Rooms felt too quiet. One could stand in the kitchen and hear breathing from the attic, but not the other way around. The geometry of the house felt wrong, as though the rooms were shifting slightly when no one was looking, as if the unseen space between the walls were growing wider, and always, from somewhere deep within that space, came movement, soft, padded, gathering speed. Something inside the walls was learning how to use the space, how to navigate it, how to come closer. Dale tried to leave. The front door resisted as if the frame had shrunk around it. The windows warped shut. The back door had swollen so tightly that even kicking it left only dents. The house had trapped him, not figuratively, literally bending its own structure to hold him inside. All the while, the voice behind the plaster grew more articulate. Don't go. Stay. Stay with us. The plural form troubled him most. Sometimes he pressed his ear to the wall out of a desperate need to understand. Big mistake. Immediately, something on the other side pressed back, like a hand made of too many joints tapping in response. He recoiled, but the tapping followed him down the wall, keeping pace. Something was mapping his movements. The house began chewing. The sound came late at night. Wet, fibrous tearing, like insulation and old timber being pulled apart strand by strand. Something inside the walls was clearing space, creating room to move. The bulges beneath the wallpaper multiplied. Some were tall, as if limbs were stretching. Others were wide, like torsos, flattening themselves to slide through impossible cracks. One bulge pulsed visibly, rising and falling like a heartbeat under cloth. Dale barricaded himself in the bedroom, but the chewing never stopped. Every night it sounded closer. The house was growing a cavity, or a mouth, a space waiting to be filled. And the voice, confident now, spoke clearly through the wall, almost open, almost through. The crack in the wall widened on its own. Plaster split in long, sticky strands that curled outward like peeling skin. Inside the darkness, shapes shifted with slow, deliberate purpose. Hands slid between beams. Too long, too many knuckles. Faces pressed against the opening, half-formed like clay sculpted blind. Some resembled Dale. Some resembled nothing human at all. They smiled when they saw him. The house exhaled, drawing in the air of the room like a lung finding its full capacity. Dust lifted from the floor. The walls expanded. The entities inside spoke together now, their voices layering over each other like a crowd in a distant stadium. Home. 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 Something stepped out of the cavity. Not fully, just enough to show it could. The last words Dale wrote, found later in a notebook on the floor, were simple. There was never something in the walls. The walls themselves were the something. By the time the authorities broke inside, the crack had sealed shut, the bulges had flattened, and the house had grown silent again. But sometimes, late at night, the neighbors swear the house leans even closer to the sidewalk, as if listening, as if waiting for someone new to move in. The radio observatory at North Point Ridge wasn't supposed to pick up anything unusual. It was an old, half-funded research station built to study background radiation. Cosmic noise, not messages. Dr. Mara Ellison worked the night shift simply because no one else wanted it. Most nights were silent, punctuated only by the hum of obsolete machines. But on the night of February 19th, something broke the static. A pulse. Not random, not natural. A structured signal. Dense, layered, mathematical. A pattern the cosmos shouldn't produce. The signal consisted of 3 repeating sequences. Mara ran them through every filter she had. The first sequence resembled a set of coordinates, but they didn't correspond to any star, planet, or point in known space. The second sequence looked like a waveform, oscillating with strange periodicity, like breathing. The third sequence was the most disturbing. When mapped to audio frequencies, it produced something chilling, a sound that resembled a human voice, but stretched, thickened, layered with vibrations too low for an animal's lungs and too high for a machine's. It didn't form words, but it had cadence, tone, and intention. She played it again, slower. Her spine tightened. It wasn't just a voice. It was speaking to her rhythm, matching her breath, aligning with her pulse, almost as if it was listening back. At 3:42 a.m., the observatory lights flickered. Mara's instruments spiked. The signal grew louder, not in amplitude, but in presence, as though it had moved closer. Her computer began translating the coordinate sequence automatically. Lines of numbers curved into spirals. Spirals formed patterns. Patterns formed shapes. Shapes that felt familiar, symmetrical, deliberate, impossible. A circle within a circle with angled arms extending outward. Not random, not mathematical. An eye. As she watched, it pulsed once. The same moment her own heartbeat stumbled. It was mimicking her again. Something vast and distant had noticed her, and now it was synchronizing. Mara stepped outside to clear her head. North Point Ridge stretched in every direction, empty and cold. Above her, the stars were painfully bright. Then one of them blinked. Not like a twinkling star. A slow, deliberate closure, like a lid. A slit of darkness opened along the sky. Not a cloud, not a shadow. A fault line in the heavens, splitting open as though the night sky were thin skin. The observatory antenna behind her began turning on its own, slowly, deliberately, until it pointed directly at the widening tear. The signal surged through her radio. The voice-like sound returned. Only now, it formed 3 syllables. Deep, layered, harmonic. They sounded like her name. Her breath froze. The signal wasn't from a distant star. It was coming from the opening in the sky itself. Something on the other side could see her. She ran back inside. The screens were covered in spirals, lines, and fractal patterns. Growing, shifting. Some part of her realized they weren't just symbols. They were instructions. How to open something. How to widen it. How to invite it through. The observatory vibrated. Metal groaned. The air tasted metallic, like blood on a battery. The signal climbed until her ears rang. Her vision fuzzed at the edges. Shapes formed in the periphery. Dark silhouettes writhing inside the static of her monitors. Not monsters, not creatures. Figures shaped like distortions, as if reality itself was folding around something trying to enter. The voice whispered again, more clearly, "Ma-Ra, open." She tried to pull the plug from the console. The moment her fingers touched the cable, she felt something inside her skull answer the signal, like her mind wasn't fully her own. The observatory lights dimmed. Something stepped through the static. Mara woke up outside. Snow covered the ground around her. The observatory was silent, dark, cold. She staggered to her feet and looked up. The slit in the sky was gone. Almost. A faint hairline crack still shimmered across the stars, like a healed wound that had only closed on the surface. Her radio handset crackled. A final pulse whispered through the static. Not her name this time. Something worse. Coordinates. New ones. Not pointing to the sky. Pointing to Earth. Pointing to locations. Many locations. Dozens. Hundreds. The signal hadn't found Mara by accident. It had used her. And now it was finding others. The handset crackled one last time. A whisper soft enough to sound like a memory. Begin. It began at 2:13 a.m. Every television still plugged into a wall flickered to life at the same time. No channels, no logos, just static. And then the emergency tone began.
This is an emergency public safety transmission. Please remain indoors. This is not a test, not a drill.
Static crackles. A soft knocking noise behind the announcer's voice. Barely audible.
All residents are instructed to remain inside their homes. Do not open your doors. Do not approach windows. Do not respond to voices outside.
The tone returns, louder. A long, slow beep that seems to vibrate the room. The screen glitches. A street appears. Empty, washed out, distorted as if overexposed. Something moves across the frame on all fours. Too fast, too jerky, too wrong.
Entities have been reported imitating human behavior. They may knock, they may call your name, they may sound like someone you know. They are not human.
The figure on the street camera feed slowly stands upright, limbs stretching like wet paper. Signal cuts.
If possible, seek shelter in a central room. Turn off lights, cover reflective surfaces, reinforce doors.
A metallic scraping echoes behind the announcer, like fingernails dragging across steel.
If you see movement outside your window, you did not. If you hear footsteps on your roof, you did not.
The voice begins doubling like a second speaker is trying to mimic the first. A brief silence. Then the announcer speaks again, much closer to the microphone.
And they adapt. They watch homes for hours. They learn routines. They learn voices.
A distant woman's voice calls out faintly.
Please help me.
The announcer stops speaking. The knocking grows louder. Then the feed cuts back to static. A new feed appears. Handheld camera. Police body cam. Timestamp corrupted. The footage is grainy, almost eaten by interference. Two officers sweep a dark street. Their flashlights flicker unpredictably. A shape stands at the end of the road, motionless. It looks like a person, but the proportions are wrong. The torso is too long. The neck is too curved. The legs bend forward, not backward. The officers call out. The figure imitates the exact tone of one of the officers, perfectly. Then the video collapses into a blur of movement and screaming. distorted beyond comprehension. The broadcast returns to the announcer.
Do not investigate outages. Do not attempt to confront any outdoor presence. Remain silent. They cannot enter unless acknowledged.
Static. A low rumble begins, like footsteps in water.
Reports indicate that the entities have begun testing structural weaknesses. Roofs, window frames, foundations.
The hum grows louder, almost overwhelming the transmission.
If your walls begin to vibrate, move away from them. If your ceiling creaks, do not look up. If you hear your name whispered through the vents, stay where you are. It is not speaking to you, it is only practicing.
A quiet gasp is heard behind the announcer. A thud, a dragging sound. The announcer returns, but the voice is different. Too smooth, too calm.
There is nothing outside. Remain calm. The situation is under control.
The voice is wrong, almost soothing, almost rehearsed. The broadcast glitches into a loop. The same 10-second clip repeating again and again. A front porch. A door shaking subtly. A thin shadow beneath it, moving side to side. Something pressing against the bottom edge. Long fingers trying to feel their way in. Each time the loop restarts, the fingers are closer, longer, more deliberate. By the fifth loop, they drag across the wooden floor like they're memorizing its texture. The loop does not stop this time. It simply corrodes. Each repetition degrades the image further. Colors bleed, shapes warp. The shadow under the door widens into something that is not a shadow. A spreading darkness with depth where there should be none. On the seventh loop, the fingers are no longer fingers. They have multiplied. They drag across the floor in slow, deliberate patterns, like they're writing something in a language that predates light. Then, abruptly, the loop freezes. The image stretches, smears upward, and splits open like torn film. A new feed replaces it. A room, empty, but not silent. Something is breathing there. Slow, wet, close. The camera angle tilts on its own, as if being held by something with too many joints. It pans toward a corner, dark, tight, pulsing slightly, and stops. A shape is crouched there, humanoid, but collapsed in on itself. Its spine rises and falls with each breath. Its head is bowed, facing the floor. Then, it lifts its face toward the camera. There are no features, only a smooth, stretched surface trembling, as if something underneath is trying to push outward. The speaker crackles.
It has learned the signal now.
The featureless face twitches, splits, opens, not like a mouth, more like a curtain being pulled aside. Behind it, something looks out. Not eyes, not anything human. Something that sees through the viewer, through the screen, through the room they are sitting in. The broadcaster's voice continues, whispering over itself.
It knows you're watching. It knows the shape of your house. It knows the silence of your breathing.
A final tone, long, piercing, cuts through the audio, warping into a distorted shriek. Then, in a voice too close, too clear, too familiar,
Do not turn around.
I started the night security job at St. Enoch Memorial because the pay was good and nobody else wanted it. The day guard wouldn't look me in the eyes. He handed me a clipboard, kept walking, and said,
Read all 10, don't skip.
Then he practically ran to his car. I sat at the security desk, alone in the fluorescent hum of the empty lobby, and unfolded the crumpled sheet. The rules were handwritten, shaky, like someone wrote them while their hands were shaking. So I read them. Rule 1. At midnight, Wing C loses power for 15 minutes. Ignore any voices during that period. Rule 2. If something knocks at the lobby glass between 12 to 12:30 a.m., check the cameras before looking. If the glass is empty on camera, leave it unanswered. Rule 3. If you see a patient walking alone, ask for their room number. If they hesitate, step out of sight for at least 3 minutes. Rule 4. If the elevators open without being called, avoid them. Rule 5. If the intercom says staff emergency, mute it immediately. Rule 6. Footsteps above you after 1:30 a.m. are not from a second floor. Move away from the sound. Rule 7. If the vending machine dispenses an item unprompted, do not touch it. Rule 8. Room 17 should be empty. If it appears occupied, inform no one and avoid the hallway. Rule 9. If a doctor or nurse without a visible ID badge asks for help, refuse politely. Rule 10. At 3 a.m., the hospital may attempt to replace you. If you see yourself anywhere, hide. Some sounded like pranks. Some sounded like paranoid ramblings. Some sounded like warnings. But reading them all at once left a weight in my chest I couldn't explain. 12 near a.m. Exactly on the minute, Wing C went completely dark. No flicker, no dimming, just black. Then the voices started. Not calling my name, not yet. Just whispering. Dozens of them, overlapping. Some sounded like children humming. Some sounded like old men speaking backwards. Some didn't sound human at all. Wet, gurgling, uneven. The darkness in Wing C seemed to move, like the hall itself was breathing. I stayed where I was, jaw locked, hands gripping the armrests. One voice finally called out,
We remember you.
My skin crawled, but I didn't move. And eventually, the lights came back on as if nothing happened. 12:14 a.m., a knock at the lobby's glass entrance. 2 knocks, hard, precise. I switched to camera 1. Nothing, no one outside. Even the parking lights were still. Then the knocking moved to the far left panel of glass, but only in real life, not on camera. I leaned just enough to see the reflection in the glass. Something stood inches from the door. Not a person, tall, extremely thin, with joints that bent outward like extra elbows. Its head nearly touched the top of the frame, angled too far forward as if the neck were loose cartilage. Its face was blurry, not out of focus, just smudged, like someone erased its features by hand. It tilted its head in 3 quick snaps. Not human movement, more like a glitch. Then it mouthed something silently, slow, deliberate. I didn't understand the words, but I felt them, like pressure behind my eyes. I turned away. My stomach twisted with instinctive disgust. When I checked again, it was gone. 1:02 a.m., footsteps, soft and dragging. A patient in a thin gown shuffled around the corner. He walked strangely, like his limbs weren't his. His face was pale, eyes unfocused, but breathing perfectly calm. I followed protocol.
Sir, what's your room number?
He froze, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then slowly, his head turned all the way toward me without the shoulders moving. The movement was too smooth, too controlled. His mouth opened just a little too wide. I stepped behind the wall, counted 3 minutes silently, and when I peeked again, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound, nothing. Just a faint chemical smell like antiseptic and rust. 1:40 a.m. Room 17 pinged on the monitors. Someone was in it. A figure stood in the far corner, facing the wall. The proportions were human, but stretched. The back too long, shoulders too narrow, arms hanging almost to the knees. The legs were reversed, not broken, intentionally reversed, like a creature assembled wrong on purpose. It slowly pressed its forehead into the wall, holding still, skin flattening and folding unnaturally, as if it was trying to push through the plaster. Then the head snapped backward almost 180 degrees to stare directly into the camera. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth skin pulsing faintly like there were organs underneath pressing outward. I unplugged the monitor. I didn't want to know if it moved closer. 2:05 a.m. A nurse approached me. She looked normal, calm, professional, except she didn't blink. Not once.
Could you help me with a patient downstairs?
He asked. Her voice was steady but empty, like she was reading from a script she didn't understand. I glanced at her badge. Blank. I stepped back.
Sorry, I can't leave the desk.
Her expression didn't change, but the skin around her eyes tightened as if something underneath was irritated. She walked away silently, but her footsteps didn't match her movement. Too many, too fast, like more legs than visible. I sat back down slowly, heart steady but hands cold. 3 a.m. The hospital hum changed pitch, like the building itself inhaled. Camera 1 flickered. I saw myself sitting at the desk. Same clothes, same posture, head lowered. Then the other me lifted his head and stared straight into the camera. Eyes open too wide, smile too long, skin too tight around the jaw. He stood, joints popping, movement slightly delayed like a puppet tugged on invisible strings. He walked toward the camera, every step more fluid, more human, as if it were learning my walk in real time. I ducked behind the desk, body tense, breath shallow. His footsteps echoed through the lobby, measured, practiced, becoming me. He stopped right in front of where I hid. Then he crouched, slow, bones cracking softly, methodically. I saw his hands first, identical to mine, but with too many knuckles. He placed one on the desk, leaning down. His voice was my voice, but smoother, like someone warming up a new instrument.
You're doing well. Come finish the shift. Come be me.
He wasn't threatening. He sounded excited, almost proud. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Morning staff arrived. The replacement vanished. I quit immediately. No explanation, just walked out. The supervisor didn't question it, didn't smile, just said quietly,
Which rule finally got to you?
I didn't answer. But as I reached the parking lot, someone stood by the entrance, watching. It tilted its head exactly the way I did when I first read the rules. It waited. The rules never said what to do if the replacement follows you home. I was hired to join a private oceanic research company, Abyssal Dynamics. They said the job was simple. Operate the sonar systems and monitor the cameras while a remote submersible, the ADS-9, descended into an uncharted trench in the mid-Pacific. But from the moment I stepped into the control room, something felt off. The walls were covered in peeling acoustic panels. The floor vibrated, not from machines, but from something deeper. It felt like the whole facility was sitting on a heartbeat. The ADS-9 began sinking past normal depths. 1,000 meters, 3,000, 6,000. Soon it slipped below the point where sunlight dies completely. The monitors flickered. Static laced the sonar screen, even though there was no interference.
Is that normal?
I asked. My supervisor didn't answer. He only said, "Keep recording. Do not attempt to stabilize the feed." At 8,400 meters down, The lights on the submersible caught something drifting in the dark. At first I thought it was a piece of plastic, but plastic doesn't move on its own. It looked like a pale tendril, long as a telephone pole, shifting in slow spirals. Its surface was covered in faintly glowing nodes, pulsing like fireflies trapped under skin. The sonar slammed with feedback so loud it made my teeth hurt. The supervisor muttered,
It's awake earlier than expected.
"Earlier?" That meant they knew. The tendril brushed the camera lens. The feed turned white, then black, then white again, like something was thinking through the camera. At 10,900 meters, the ADS-9 lights illuminated something impossible. A wall, not stone, not coral, something built. A colossal arch of smooth black material covered in spiraling depressions like fingerprints from titanic hands. It stretched farther than the camera could view. The center of the arch opened into a void, perfectly circular, absolutely black, not dark. Black, as if the ocean refused to enter. I whispered.
Is that a cave?
The supervisor said nothing, but the tremor in his hand told me everything. The sub drifted near the opening. Then the void moved. At first I thought it was a shadow shifting, but the movement was deliberate. Something blinked. The ADS-9's lights glinted off a curve of wet, glassy surface, like the surface of an immense orb. It wasn't a cave. It wasn't a structure. It was a face, a piece of one. What we thought was architecture was the edge of an eyelid, a lid large enough to eclipse a frigate. The eye rolled upward, following the ADS-9, following us. The pressure sensors spiked. The whole trench trembled. The sonar stopped functioning as sonar. Instead of pings, it began to produce syllables, soft, wet sounds, something between a language and an organ being pressed. The technicians bolted from the room. My supervisor stood frozen, whispering,
It's communicating. It finally knows where we are.
The ADS-9 lights dimmed. A new glow replaced them. From beneath the creature's skin, patterns, symbols, moving like bioluminescent veins forming words I couldn't understand. The creature's pupil grew wider, wider, until the entire screen was swallowed by black. The pressure alarms went insane. The trench floor rose. No, something beneath the trench floor did. The entire camera view tilted as the ADS-9 was pushed upward by a rising current. The creature was ascending. The deepest part of the ocean, the coldest, darkest, most inaccessible place on Earth, was opening. Something climbed from below the crust. Something with joints that cracked like thunder and skin that reflected no light. I felt a buzzing in my skull, a hum that vibrated my teeth. The creature wasn't speaking into the water anymore. It was speaking into me. The last thing the ADS-9 recorded was the ocean parting, not like water making room for a mass, but like it was being rejected, shoved away from a shape too ancient to coexist with it, a form taller than mountains crowned with looping bioluminescent growths, like tendrils that held memories older than the seafloor. As it climbed, the communication system erupted with a low, drawn-out tone. Not a warning, not a threat, a summoning. The supervisor grabbed my shoulder, shaking, eyes wild.
It's not rising toward us,
He whispered.
It's rising because something else is coming up behind it.
And then, the signal went dead. Every monitor turned black. Every system shut down. And far beneath the quiet rumble of the generators, I swear I heard something knocking. I remember the hum of my tires on the asphalt and nothing else. No music, no thoughts. just the road stretching ahead into a desert that shouldn't have been there. I'd driven this route for years. There were gas stations, houses, towns. But that night, everything was flattened into endless sand and a horizon that looked too tall, like the world had grown new shapes while I wasn't watching. The sky felt swollen. The stars sat lower, dimmer, like they were being held in place by an invisible ceiling. And there, on that impossible horizon, I saw them. Not moving, not watching, just existing. Shapes taller than thunderheads, limbs like distant mountain ranges, bodies bent in geometries that made my eyes tear involuntarily. I should have turned back. But something in me whispered, "You're too small for them to notice." I clung to that idea, until the moment it stopped being true. I didn't see the creature move. I only saw the result. A shift in the skyline, a subtle dip, like a continent-sized head tilting downward just a fraction, as if testing a new angle, as if adjusting its focus. On me. I didn't hear a sound, but silence itself felt ruptured. The world went thinner. The air went tight. My pulse sped so fast it became a whine inside my throat, and in the space between two heartbeats, I understood something. I had been acknowledged, not seen, not studied, not targeted, just registered, like noticing a speck of dust drifting in a sunbeam. Insignificant, but briefly real. That single moment lasted less than a second. I haven't recovered since. When the creature straightened again, returning its attention to whatever unimaginable plane it inhabited, the damage was already done. I kept driving, but the world felt wrong, flattened, hollow. Something in me had cracked open, not fear, not trauma. Scale. I had understood scale at a level a human brain is not engineered for. I realized my life wasn't small, it was microscopic, and something vast had, only once, bothered to shift its awareness in my direction. Once I realized that, something changed inside me, permanently. At first, it was little things. I'd look at buildings, and their size felt arbitrary, laughable even. My house, the supermarket, the city skyline. Every structure felt like a child's toy, a plastic model sitting on a table too large to comprehend. Then came the visual distortions. Objects felt wrong, distorted, like the angles didn't line up anymore, like everything was tilted slightly toward something enormous just beyond the border of my vision. People looked small, fragile, like soft shapes that would collapse under the slightest pressure. I couldn't look anyone in the eyes. The scale mismatch was nauseating, but the worst part, the part that ruined me, was the spatial vertigo. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature's silhouette towering over the horizon, immobile, eternal, indifferent, and every time I opened them, I felt displaced, like my brain kept trying to reconcile the truth. If something that large exists, then everything else is wrong. Doctors said I developed spatial derealization, perceptual disintegration, visual agnosia, auditory distortion, episodic memory fragmentation, but none of their diagnoses capture the real issue. My brain is trying to expand to understand something it cannot contain. It's tearing itself apart, trying. Sometimes, late at night, I feel a pressure at the back of my skull, like a thumb gently pressing into clay. Not painful, just heavy, aware, like some tiny remnant of that thing's attention never fully returned to wherever it came from. Like a man casually glancing at an anthill and remembering hours later that he might have stepped near something living. Not important, just lingering, insignificant, yet still present. Here is the part that stays with me, the part you will probably think about later. The creature didn't choose to acknowledge me. It didn't lean down with intention. It didn't look at me. It simply adjusted, and I happened to fall within the radius of its awareness. Meaning, there was no reason behind it, no purpose, no symbolism, no destiny, no cosmic selection. I was just there. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong scale. But that's not the part that eats at me. This is, if a being that large can notice me by accident, what happens when it notices me on purpose? Because sometimes, when the world goes quiet, I feel that pressure behind my eyes, like something vast is testing the edges of its memory, wondering where it left off, and remembering me. That's why I don't sleep anymore. Not because I'm afraid it will come back, but because I'm afraid it hasn't left. I don't remember the flash. Everyone talks about it like they felt a pressure, or heard a pop, or sensed something pass over the world. For me, it was just a blink. 1 second I was scrolling through my phone. The next I was staring into a void so absolute it felt like my skull was full of black ink. Everyone else screamed. I didn't. I was too shocked to make a sound, too stunned by the sheer nothing. The world went blind together. Hospitals overflowed. Traffic froze. Planes fell. People cried out for help, but no one could help themselves. It was chaos in its purest form, and for 3 days I lived inside it. 3 days of stumbling, begging, starving, clawing my way through darkness. 3 days of hearing others break down around me. 3 days of thinking this was just some natural disaster we'd recover from. And then, on the 4th morning, I opened my eyes and saw not light, not the sun, not my bedroom ceiling. I saw them. Colossal silhouettes, tall enough to pierce the low clouds, standing silently in places where buildings used to be. Their limbs resembled antlers, branches, tendrils, structures that should not exist. Their bodies were made of geometry that fought itself, angles folding into curves, curves flattening into dimensions that hurt to look at. One of them stood outside my apartment building. Another hunched over the ruins of the grocery store. Another perched on the water tower like a bloated skeletal bird made of broken glass and roots. I screamed internally, because screaming externally would have gotten me killed. But the worst part wasn't their size. It wasn't their shapes. It was the fact that they moved slowly and deliberately, bending down to observe us. The blind masses wandering beneath them, like farmers watching livestock graze. And everyone else just continued stumbling around, unaware of the monsters brushing past them. That's when I realized the blindness wasn't caused by them. The blindness was allowed by them. A mercy, a cover, a way to exist among us without panic or rebellion. And then another realization. They assumed we couldn't see them. For a moment I considered screaming, running, begging someone to tell me they saw it too. But instinct saved me. I froze. I kept my eyes half-lidded. I let my head sway like I was still blind. If I wanted to live, I had to pretend. That day, I walked among them. And they walked among us. Their movements created wind-like currents that smelled of rust and ancient stone. Their shadows bent like living things, writhing around street signs and trees. They whispered to each other in tones so deep the pavement vibrated. And every time one passed beside me, I held my breath until my lungs burned. But there were smaller ones too, child-sized, or maybe dog-sized, hunched creatures with too many elbows, Too many joints. Faces like masks carved out of wet clay. These ones inspected us up close. They sniffed. They clicked. They touched people's faces with long, dripping fingers to make sure we were still blind. And then one of them, one with an exposed jaw and spiraling eyes, stopped in front of me. I felt its breath on my cheek. I let my eyes go dull. I whispered, "Please, please don't." It let out a grunt and moved on. My legs nearly gave out. Every day after that became a performance, fumbling for doors, knocking things over, bumping into walls, because if I acted too capable, they would know. But seeing them was damaging me. Every glance was a migraine. Every movement they made throbbed against my skull. Every whisper rattled my bones like they were tuning forks. It was maddening. Even the sky wasn't safe anymore. Behind the clouds, something enormous shifted, like a sea creature rolling beneath the waves. And once, only once, I saw a pupil the size of a stadium blink above the atmosphere. They weren't just here. They were everywhere. I should have kept pretending. I should have never looked directly at any of them. But one night, exhaustion broke me. I met the eyes of the one outside my building. Not intentionally. A moment of weakness. A fraction of a second. It froze. The entire neighborhood seemed to stop breathing. A tremor ran up its impossible frame, and dozens of its antler-like protrusions turned toward me like antennae sensing prey. I snapped my gaze downward, but it was too late. It had seen me see it. The creature tilted its head, a movement so slow and heavy it sounded like groaning metal. My vision blurred at the edges. Blood filled my mouth. My ears rang. And in that moment I understood why they preferred us blind. Looking at them is permission for them to look back. They do not tolerate awareness, not from prey. Since that night, I can't stop seeing things even when I close my eyes. Shapes behind my eyelids, movements in the walls, shadows in my own pupils. I think the creature is watching me through my mind now, the same way a human watches an ant wander around unaware it's being observed. I still pretend to be blind during the day, but sometimes I slip, sometimes I look, and whenever I do, I feel it get closer. Not physically, inside. I know the truth now. It doesn't want to kill me. It wants to change me into something that cannot look away. We weren't supposed to be there. Our mission was simple. A deep-sea retrieval off the Mariana Trench, recovering a signal from an unmapped depth. Something had been transmitting from 7 miles down, slower than sonar, older than radio, almost organic in rhythm. A pulse, not a beacon. We lowered the submersible, watching it disappear into black water that looked thicker than liquid. Minutes passed, then an hour. Then the cables started vibrating, not from tension, but like something below was plucking them. The winch screamed, the cable snapped, and whatever we'd hooked onto began rising on its own. The ocean boiled. Something enormous surfaced, not with force but with inevitability, as though buoyancy itself bowed to its presence. It was dead, or sleeping, or something in between. A shape too massive and too wrong to process, like a mountain of flesh arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. The moment its body breached the surface, our equipment went silent. Then the sky dimmed. Then the waves flattened. Our world felt paused, and then the screaming started. Not from the creature, from the crew. They dropped one by one, foaming, convulsing, clutching their heads. But not me. I remained fully conscious. I still don't know why. The body didn't rot. It didn't breathe. It simply existed, like an idea too heavy for reality to hold. Nothing moved. Not the wind. Not the water. Even the clouds looked frozen. The ship's instruments flickered, displaying symbols that weren't part of any language we knew. Diagrams that shifted when I blinked, like geometry trying to remember itself. Hours passed before I realized something was wrong with time. The sun hadn't moved. The shadows hadn't changed length. It was like the world was waiting for something. Then small details began to warp. The railing beside me bent outward, then returned to normal. Footsteps echoed on the deck even when no one walked. The pattern on my sleeve rearranged itself into shapes I didn't recognize. It didn't feel like hallucination. It felt like reality recalibrating, like a dream adjusting to a shift in the sleeper's breathing, and I was the only dreamer awake. By the second day, if it was a day at all, I noticed the changes weren't random. Everything around me was becoming simpler, blurry, under-detailed. The ocean stopped reflecting the sky. The sky lost its gradient. The clouds flattened into textureless smears. I started forgetting small things. What the captain's voice sounded like. The color of my childhood home. How to tie certain knots. Not the memory itself, but the definition of the memory. The edges of it. Like the mental equivalent of fog. Then I found the ship's logbook. The ink was flowing off the pages. Not dripping, lifting, floating like faint black mist, then dissolving into nothing. Reality wasn't breaking. Reality was loosening, like a story whose author had started forgetting the details, like a dreamer beginning to stir. I approached the corpse. It wasn't decaying. If anything, it looked clearer than before, more defined. While everything else blurred, it sharpened. I realized what was happening far too late. This thing, this ancient impossibility, wasn't invading our world. We were living inside its dream, a dream it had been having for eons without knowing it. Just slipping away, the same way morning sunlight dissolves the last fragments of a dream. The creature's presence didn't acknowledge me. There was no eye contact, no telepathy, no recognition. To it, I wasn't even an ant. I was part of the background noise of its imagination, and now the dream was ending. It didn't happen all at once. The ocean blurred first, waves smearing like wet paint. The sky folded into itself, shapes pooling like ink in water. Objects lost their edges as though the world was forgetting what straight lines were. My memories dimmed, not because I was dying, but because the concept of memory itself was thinning. The deck beneath my feet softened, hardened, then trembled, as though physics kept rewriting the rules to match a fading narrative. Even my hands began losing definition. I wasn't fading visually. I was fading conceptually, like my existence was losing its place in whatever story the sleeper had been dreaming. I felt my thoughts stretch thin, the meaning leaking out of them word by word. And through that soft unraveling, one truth settled into me. This wasn't punishment, wasn't judgment, wasn't deliberate. The old God wasn't aware of us. Its awakening wasn't hostile. It was simply indifferent. A sleeper stirring, breathing, shifting. And in that shift, its dream dissolved. Our world dissolved. I wasn't being erased for something I did. I was being unwritten because the story was ending. The sky folded. The ocean peeled away. The ship thinned into translucent lines, and I felt myself slipping. Not falling, not dying, just being let go. A thread pulled loose from a tapestry. The final thing I sensed wasn't sound, but the idea of sound. A breath, soft, ancient, indifferent. The breath of something waking. And then, everything ended. Quietly, softly, completely. Like the last echo of a dream the moment its dreamer opens their eyes. I work in the ICU. At night, it doesn't feel like a place where secrets should exist. Everything is glass, curtains, monitors blinking like quiet eyes, machines breathing for people who forgot how. The first time it happened, everyone assumed it was a hallucination. A man in bed 12 had been unconscious for 3 days after a cardiac arrest. Minimal brain activity. Family already grieving in advance. At 3:17 a.m., his heart monitor spiked. Not dangerously, just awake. And then we heard him. Not speaking, thinking. It wasn't loud. It sounded like a voice coming from inside the walls. Flat, unfiltered, unemotional.
I don't want them here. I never loved her. Please don't let my son hear this.
His mouth never moved. The nurse froze. The resident dropped his clipboard. His wife screamed his name, begging him to stop. He died 4 minutes later, and the room went quiet again. Within a week, it happened 6 more times. Always the same pattern. Critical condition. Minutes or hours from death. Then the thoughts began leaking out. Not dreams, not memories. Truth. The things people never said because they were too ashamed, too cruel, too small to admit them. At first, doctors blamed medication, hypoxia, terminal delirium. Then someone recorded it. The video spread faster than any explanation. Hospitals banned phones. It didn't matter. Everyone already knew. When you're dying, people can hear what you're thinking. The cruelest part wasn't the content. It was that the patients knew it was happening. They tried to stop it. Their thoughts got louder. Some begged for sedation. It didn't help. Others tried to pray, sing, count, think of nothing. The truth always forced its way through. Families stopped visiting. You could feel it in the ICU. Chairs untouched, flowers wilting in hallways. A woman stood outside her husband's room for an hour, crying, unable to step inside.
I don't want to know.
She kept saying.
I don't want to know who he really was.
Some people stayed anyway. They always regretted it. A teenage girl came in after a car accident. Internal bleeding. No parents yet. Her thoughts began before we could stabilize her.
I didn't mean to kill him. He ran the light. I lied.
The police officer in the room quietly left. She died before her parents arrived. The case reopened the next morning. Hospice changed first. They started advertising quiet deaths. Private rooms, thick walls, extra fees. People paid everything they had for silence. Those who couldn't afford it died publicly. Then families started requesting care be withdrawn early. Not because there was no hope, because they didn't want to hear what was coming. A son signed a DNR while his father was still responsive, confused, but not dying yet. When I asked him why, he said,
I already know he never liked me. I don't need details.
The worst shift of my life was a mass casualty night. Fire, 6 patients critical. The ICU became a chorus. Thoughts overlapping, voices bleeding together. One man kept repeating,
I did it on purpose.
Another sobbed internally about children he abandoned. A woman laughed, thinking about money she'd hidden. A nurse quit mid-shift. Another collapsed, hands over her ears, screaming that she couldn't turn it off. None of us could. People started avoiding hospitals altogether. Some chose to die alone. Others overdosed quietly at home. Suicide notes stopped appearing. Why write when your last thoughts would explain everything? Then came the policy change. No press release, no announcement, just a memo. End-of-life auditory suppression approved. Families were told it would prevent the thoughts from manifesting. Staff were told not to explain further. Here's the truth. It didn't work. The thoughts never stopped. What changed was the procedure. Families were removed earlier. Curtains were drawn faster. Rooms were cleared before the truth had time to finish forming. The deafening wasn't for the patient. It was for everyone else. Staff still heard everything. Confessions poured into empty rooms. Apologies meant for no one. Hatred with no target. Love that came too late to matter. We documented none of it. We were instructed not to. Families left believing their loved ones died peacefully. Doctors told themselves it was mercy, and the dying finished confessing to no one. I still work nights. Sometimes when a patient flatlines, I swear something lingers, like a thought that never found a listener. I stopped visiting my father. He's terminal, months left. We've had a difficult life together, things neither of us ever said out loud. He asked me once why I don't come by. I told him I was busy. The truth is simpler. I'm afraid that when the time comes, there will be no one left in the room, and everything he ever wanted to say will finally be spoken to an empty space. They didn't call it sleep paralysis at first. They called it transient conscious lock. A neurological event. Temporary. Manageable. That's what the press releases said. People freezing in bed, eyes open, unable to scream, aware of everything. A harmless glitch in the brain. Stress-related. Viral videos, jokes. Then the cluster started. Whole families, entire apartment buildings, ER wards filling up with patients who weren't unconscious, just unreachable. Almost all of them described the same thing. A tall, dark shape near the bed. Not moving, not touching, just watching. Doctors called it a stress archetype, a posture hallucination, the brain trying to assign a shape to fear. They told the media it was common. They didn't say it was consistent. I was working night intake at a public hospital when the first memo came down. Do not allow family members to remain in the room during episodes. No explanation, just an order. The truth surfaced quietly. Neurologists noticed something disturbing. People who witnessed an episode were far more likely to experience one themselves. Not emotionally affected, neurologically affected. Watching someone trapped taught the brain how to trap itself. But more than that, people who saw the patient later described the same figure, even when the patient never mentioned it. Observation wasn't just transmission, it was calibration. The government got involved within weeks. Officially, it was for public safety. Unofficially, it was because executives were starting to report bedside disturbances. Same shape, same height, same position, always watching. The solution came from a private contractor, a neuroscience firm with military funding and a name that sounded clean and harmless. They proposed something radical. Paralysis could be redirected, induced in one subject, suppressed in another, like current in a wire. Someone had to hold it. At first, they used volunteers, people with chronic illness, people drowning in debt. People who signed forms they didn't understand because the alternative was eviction or prison. They were housed in government facilities, kept awake just enough, kept alive just enough. When the paralysis came, it went to them. The figure went too. That part wasn't in the proposal. Doctors noticed something else. When the paralysis was transferred, the hallucination didn't fade. It followed, not physically, neurologically. The receiving subject always reported the same presence, standing where a bed should be, watching a body that couldn't move, as if the brain needed something to look at while it endured. It worked. Cases dropped overnight in wealthy neighborhoods. Executives went back to sleeping 8 hours. Officials praised the partnership. They called it a containment success. Then the volunteers started dying, not from paralysis, from exhaustion, from fear, from being awake inside a body that wouldn't respond, while something stood there night after night. So the criteria changed. They stopped calling them volunteers. They called them candidates. The new list was quiet. The poor, the undocumented, the incarcerated, people already costing the system. Entire neighborhoods became recruitment zones. If you lived in the wrong zip code and experienced an episode, you were flagged. A social worker would visit, then a doctor, then men with contracts. I helped process transfers. I told myself I wasn't choosing anyone, just following orders. But I noticed patterns. People with no family, no legal representation, no one who would ask questions. They went into facilities that weren't on any map, and no one came back. I found out the truth by accident. A mislabeled file, a data stream left open. The paralysis wasn't just being redirected anymore. It was being stored, held in bodies kept alive solely for that purpose. Human buffers. They weren't asleep. They weren't dreaming. They were awake, forever, while the sensation passed through them, and the figure was no longer episodic. Repeated exposure stabilized it. The brain stopped generating variations. The shape became fixed. Tall, black, close, not a threat, not an attacker, a witness. My name appeared on the list 3 months later, not as a patient, as an asset. They said I had high neurological compatibility. I asked what that meant. They said I'd adjust. They said it was temporary. They said I'd be compensated. I don't sleep anymore. I don't need to. The paralysis doesn't wait for dreams now. It's always here, a pressure just behind my eyes. And the figure stands where the bed used to be. Every time, somewhere far away, someone closes their eyes peacefully. They don't see it. They never will, because it's busy watching me. They call this progress. They call this humane. They say it's better than letting it spread. And they're right, for everyone else. I'm not frozen because of a disorder. I'm frozen because I'm useful. And as long as people want to sleep, something has to stay awake and watch.